History is full of sieges that ended in ruin, but a few fortresses seemed untouchable. They stood for centuries, surrounded by enemies, yet their flags never came down. Each stone still carries the memory of storms they survived, battles, hunger, and fear. When you look at them today, it's hard not to wonder how they managed to endure what destroyed so many others. Number 1. The anatomy of an unbreakable castle. A fortress that never fell wasn't just big and scary. It was a machine with parts that worked together to punish any mistake an attacker made. The first decision was always where to put it. Builders hunted for ground that already fought for them. A sheer cliff, a volcanic crag, a knife-edge ridge, or a bend in a river forced an army to slow down, bunch up, and climb while under fire. Even lowland sites turned flat country into a trap by flooding fields, cutting broad ditches, and shaping man-made lakes that swallowed ladders and siege towers. Once the setting was right, the walls turned from a line into a system. Concentric design put one ring inside another, each with a different job. The outer circuit soaked up the first hit and kept enemy engines at a distance. The inner circuit sat higher, so archers could shoot over the outer wall and rake the same ground again. That stacking of fields of fire made every step forward feel like walking into a funnel. Towers carried the rhythm of the defense. Round or polygonal forms denied easy weak corners and opened wider arcs for shooting. Their placement created crossing lanes, so no dead zones sat against the walls. At the top, parapets and machicolations let defenders work straight down without leaning out, so stones, bolts, and burning pots fell exactly where ladders met the masonry. Arrow slits looked tiny from the field, but were splayed inside, giving room to aim while keeping the shooter hard to hit. The gatehouse was never just a door. It was a gauntlet built in stone. Multiple portcullises fell like steel curtains. A drawbridge broke approach speed. Murder holes in the ceiling turned the entry into a kill box if rams got close. If one barrier failed, the next one snapped shut before attackers could form up. Inside the circuits, the plan favored movement and stamina. Long wall walks let small teams redeploy fast without crossing open yards. Postern doors and sally ports gave options to strike engines at night and run home before the camp woke. Storage rooms tucked into towers kept missiles and spare bows close to the action. Deep wells and protected cisterns sat under roofs so water could not be poisoned or cut. Even staircases mattered. Tight spirals and narrow steps broke momentum and forced single-file fighting that favored the person above. Put together, sight, water, stone, height, and flow created a layered organism. An army could bring bravery and numbers, but the castle made them pay for every yard twice. That is why some walls did not need heroics. They simply made time and terrain do the heavy lifting until the siege failed on its own. Number 2. The power of preparation and supply. When a castle held out through siege after siege, it was usually because the people inside treated logistics like another wall. Months before trouble, stewards counted grain, salted meat, dried fish, and hard cheese, and packed them where damp could not creep in. Beer and wine were stored because they stayed safer than open water in a crisis. Wells were protected inside the walls, and many sites added roofed cisterns that caught rain and fed stone-lined tanks, so an enemy could not poison a stream or cut a pipe and end the fight in a week. The smartest strongholds also kept a back door for lifelines. At sea castles, a water gate and a steep stair let small boats slip in during bad weather and unload sacks of barley or barrels of ale while the besiegers watched from the wrong side of the cliffs. In river fortresses, a guarded landing or postern gave the garrison a chance to run night convoys under cover and keep the ovens hot. Places with great artificial lakes turned the ground itself into a storehouse and a shield. Flooded meadows stopped engines from rolling, starved sappers of dry soil, and bought time for supply to stretch. That time mattered because rationing was a craft on its own. Bread was measured by weight. Meat days were spaced out. Horses that could not be fed were moved early or culled to protect the men. Millstones, ovens, and salting tubs were kept close to the inner ward, so the last line of defense still had heat, food, and water when the outer works fell. Tactically, supply was more than storage. Garrisons used sally ports to hit trenches at night, burn siege towers, seize tools, and drag back timber and sacks the enemy left behind. Those quick strikes kept the camp nervous and stretched its food. Inside the walls, armorers fixed rivets, bowyers straightened shafts, and crews hauled missiles to the parapets so no one wasted effort when a breach opened. Commanders also planned for disease, because a hungry army outside often got sick faster than a rationed garrison inside. Non-combatants were sent out early when possible to save grain and avoid panic. When famine finally arrived, it usually came first to the besiegers, who had to feed more mouths in the open with longer supply lines. A castle did not need to be invincible if it could stay fed, watered, and organized while the enemy ran out of time, wood, and will. Number 3. Masters of Siege Defense. A castle that held out again and again did not rely on luck or brute strength. It relied on people who knew their craft and used the building like a tool. The garrison trained to keep calm when ladders hit the wall and when rams thudded against the gates. Archers and crossbowmen worked in pairs, so one aimed while the other kept strings dry, fetched bundles of bolts, and watched for shield gaps. They targeted faces, armpits, and legs because armor left joints and vision slits exposed. Above them, crews on the parapets used machicolations and murder holes to work straight down over the wall line. They dropped stones to smash ladder tops and poured scalding water or hot sand to drive climbers off the rungs. Oil gets mentioned in stories, but it was expensive and not the first choice. Heated sand and water were easier to prepare in bulk and just as hard to endure. The gatehouse was the most technical workplace in the whole fortress. Teams ran the drawbridge, slammed portcullises, and trapped intruders in a narrow passage where they could be shot from both ends and from slots in the ceiling. When attackers dragged up a ram, defenders braced the doors from behind, soaked wood to slow burning, and focused every missile on the men under the ram's canopy. Engineers made sure nothing ran out at the wrong moment. Slingstones, fire pots, and spare timbers were stacked at regular intervals, so crews did not waste time carrying loads across open yards. Blacksmiths kept mail patched, reheaded arrows, and repaired springs and trigger parts for crossbows. If attackers tried to tunnel, listeners pressed bowls to the floor to catch faint scraping and marked the direction with chalk. Then miners started a counter-tunnel to break into the enemy shaft, or to flood it, and collapse the roof before the wall above began to crack. Sorties through sally ports kept pressure on the siege lines. Small groups slipped out at night, burned a tower frame, smashed a trebuchet sling, or stole tools and wood, then ran home under cover of the wall guns. Everything worked because the command rhythm was steady. Meals were regular. Watches rotated on time. Non-fighters stayed off the wall and carried water, stones, and messages. The aim was always the same. Make the approach deadly. Make every repair fast. Make the enemy think tomorrow will be worse than today. When that feeling took hold in the camp, even a strong army began to loosen its grip and drift away. Number 4. The evolution of fortifications. Early medieval strongholds started as timber motte and bailey sites because they were quick to build and easy to garrison, but wood burned, rotted, and struggled against heavy rams. As conflict hardened, builders shifted to stone keeps and thick curtain walls that could take repeated blows and still stand. Corners on square towers proved vulnerable to mining and direct hits, so designers favored rounded or polygonal towers that shed force better and created wider arcs of fire along the wall face. Arrow slits grew more sophisticated with deep, splayed interiors that let one defender cover a broad field while staying hard to hit. Overhanging stone galleries with floor openings, machicolations over walls, and murder holes inside gate passages allowed defenders to work straight down without exposing themselves. Builders also shaped the base of the wall with a sloped batter or talus, which forced ladders to angle awkwardly and made fallen stones shatter outward into attacking ranks. By the late 13th century, elite castles stopped acting like single shells and turned into layered systems. The concentric plan put one defended ring inside another at different heights so crossfire could sweep every approach twice. Great Welsh and Crusader examples show the idea at full scale. Beaumaris was laid out with geometric clarity, and ring within ring, while Caerphilly paired its multiple circuits with vast engineered lakes that stalled siege towers and blocked sappers. Kenilworth used a huge mere as both shield and moat, and Carcassonne wrapped a town in 2 belts of walls and a forest of towers. Krak des Chevaliers stood out for its massive sloping base and inner shell keep, a model of depth that drained the momentum of assaults long before a breach. Even within the gate, design shifted from a single door to long gatehouses with multiple portcullises and concealed shooting positions that turned entries into kill zones. As gunpowder matured, castles adapted rather than vanished. Walls were set lower and thicker, sometimes backed with earth to soak up impact. Gun loops appeared in gatehouses and flanks so small, cannon and handguns could fire from cover. Bodiam shows how a late medieval showpiece still integrated firearm ports, and Raglan went further with circular gun embrasures in its lower works. Over time, the logic of artillery pushed designers toward angled fronts and projecting bastions that turned walls into platforms for guns and created interlocking fire across the ditches. Classic high medieval castles did not become useless overnight, but the best either evolved into hybrid artillery positions or ceded the front line to new star-shaped forts. A few, like Dover, kept being refitted across centuries, which shows how fortifications were never static monuments. They were living systems that changed as weapons, supply, and siege methods changed, and the sites that survived longest were the ones that kept up with the technology rather than resisting it. Number 5. Fear, reputation, and strategy. Some castles didn't survive because their walls were stronger. They survived because their names alone scared off enemies. In medieval warfare, fear was a real weapon. Commanders often decided where to attack, not just based on maps, but on rumors. If a fortress was known for brutal defenses and stubborn soldiers, it often avoided a fight altogether. Dover Castle is a good example. It had already resisted several sieges, so when word spread that it was nearly impossible to take, many enemies didn't even try. Reputation worked like armor. A strong name protected a castle as much as stone walls did, but that reputation had to be earned. When a garrison fought off a siege and stayed standing, it became a story that traveled fast. Soldiers shared it from camp to camp. By the time another army showed up, the legend had already done half the defending. Castles like Windsor or Harlech were known for their long, drawn-out defenses, which made future attackers question if it was worth wasting men and supplies. That hesitation often saved the castle before the first arrow was shot. Defenders also knew how to use psychology. They didn't just wait behind walls. They acted as if they were stronger than they were. At night, they would light extra torches and fires to make it look like reinforcements had arrived. Trumpets would sound from different corners of the walls to create confusion. Sometimes small groups sneaked out through secret tunnels or sally ports, attacked the enemy's camp, and disappeared again. These sudden strikes ruined sleep, burned food stores, and spread panic among attackers who already doubted their chances. Once fear started, it spread fast. Attackers tried to use fear too. They sometimes executed prisoners in view of the castle to make the defenders give up. But that often had the opposite effect. Seeing what would happen if they surrendered pushed defenders to fight even harder. Some castles even used negotiation as a weapon. They stalled peace talks, pretended to agree to terms, or promised surrender, only to buy time until help arrived. This kind of patience was a strategy on its own. Most sieges didn't end in battle. They ended when the besieging army ran out of food, money, or time. In the end, the castles that never fell combined smart planning with psychology. They knew that every army had limits. Fear could drain morale faster than arrows, and time could destroy an army faster than swords. So they built not just walls of stone, but walls of reputation. Ones that made attackers lose the fight in their minds before it even began.